Hello and welcome back to my Tony Hawk's Pro Skater review marathon. It's been quite a while since we last spoke about the series with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, and the reason for that is that the fourth game in the series is actually extremely long. It took around 13 hours just to complete the career mode in the game, and going into it, I didn't remember it being quite that lengthy. But anyway, enough rambling, and let's get started taking a look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. At first glance, Pro Skater 4 would probably come across as being very similar to the previous games in the series. It opens with a live-action montage of all of the skaters featured in the game. It has a creator park mode which is pretty much identical to how it was in Pro Skater 3, only with the ability to make the park areas bigger and smaller, and for some reason only featuring 2 themes to choose from. It has the standard free skate and single session modes which have been present in every single Tony Hawk game so far, and all of this would probably lead you to think that it's going to be a very similar experience to Pro Skater 3. Outside of all of those modes though, practically everything else has been significantly expanded, from the career mode, creator skater, and multiplayer modes. The first thing I always do in any Tony Hawk game is make my own skater, so you know what that means? It's time for created skater or realer skater. Pro Skater 4 not only has slightly better graphics than Pro Skater 3, but the customization options are also more in depth, offering more clothes to choose from and even scale options. So this should be the hardest yet to determine which is the real me and which is the game version of me. As per usual, let me know down in the comments if you can tell the difference. Something else I love that this game introduces to the series is something I've been saying should have been in the game from Pro Skater 2, and that's the ability to unlock new clothes to further customize your skater. While it's great that this is finally in the game, the amount of stuff to unlock is pretty lackluster, and the majority of the unlockable stuff is just gimmicky, like a clown costume, a koala head, and things like that. I also find it slightly strange how Ollie the Magic Bum and Officer Dick are no longer proper characters, but have to be created using these unlockable cosmetics and saved as created skaters. Both of these characters are staples of the series, so it's kind of an injustice to see them get treated like this. But still, at least they are in the game. Private Carrera, on the other hand, is nowhere to be seen, making this the first Pro Skater game she didn't make an appearance in. Overall though, the creator skater is better than it's ever been, allowing you to fine-tune your character's scale, change the colour of all of your clothes, and generally having more hairstyles, preset faces, accessories, tattoos, and more to choose from to make your skater distinct. The absolute biggest difference between Pro Skater 4 and the older games though, is how the career mode is structured. Rather than giving you a time limit and a list of objectives to complete within that time frame, Pro Skater 4 instead ditches the time limit completely and goes for a more open world approach in which you skate around and talk to NPCs who give you one set objective to complete within a time limit. This allows for some much more experimental objectives that wouldn't have been seen in the previous games, such as jumping off a huge ramp to land on a target floating in the sea, lying down on your board to take part in a luge course, skitching on the back of an elephant while it defecates on you, and way more. There's even a selection of minigames that you can find in certain levels, like this one where you play tennis by hitting the ball with your board, this one where you avoid monkeys throwing poo at you, or this really weird one where you have a bet with a pimp on which woman is gonna win a fight under a seedy looking bridge in London. Not only is this minigame really weird to be in a skating game, but it's also completely luck based and needs to be done about 10 times to fully complete. It's tedious to say the least, and they reuse this minigame in a later level where you bet on 2 rhinos who are charging into each other. Most of these minigames are a nice little distraction, but these 2 are pretty bad and not fun at all. The main objectives in the game consist of things we saw in the previous games, like collecting skate and getting high scores, but there's also some brand new ones, like collecting combo letters, which are kinda like the skate letters, only they're placed in a line and you need to get them all in one combo. I really like this objective and I feel like it could have been implemented into the older games really well too. We also have an objective in each level which consists of performing a specific special trick in a certain area. These objectives upon completion unlock a new special trick slot, allowing you to assign more and more special tricks to your skater as you progress through the game. There's also always this objective type where you need to perform tricks that appear on the screen in quick succession to eliminate them before they build up too much, and upon clearing them all, you win. This is also a pretty cool idea for an objective, but I would have liked for it to have had voice acting, because the idea of it is that there's always someone shouting out the tricks for you to do, but there's never actually any shouting, which comes across as a bit strange. Other than the objectives which are reused in all of the levels, we also have a ton of objectives which are specific to an individual level. These objectives are what make each level really stand out from another and give the game a hell of a lot of variety. You can be transferring between festival floats in college, helping a prisoner escape from Alcatraz by collecting equipment for him, herding lions back into their pen in zoo, and way more. By completing each objective, you'll either unlock a new stat point or some cash, which is a mechanic that returns from Pro Skater 2 after being absent in 3. The cash system here has been greatly expanded, and it's probably one of the best things about the game. Not only do you get cash by doing objectives, but also by doing the minigames and by finding cash icons throughout all of the levels, again just like in Pro Skater 2. This heavily incentivizes exploration, and the fact that there's so much to spend the money on is amazing. You can buy new levels, skaters, clothes, movies, cheats and decks, so there's always something new for you to be aiming to unlock. I do feel like the cash icons can sometimes be placed in extremely awkward positions, which can be infuriating, but luckily, with the game not having a time limit, it's not too bad, and with persistence, you'll be able to get them all. Another awesome feature this game has is the ability to create custom reset areas. So if you do get to an awkward position that's difficult to reach, you can pause the game and create a custom marker which you can reset yourself to at any time. This makes some of the awkwardly placed cache icons so much easier to get, and I think if this custom reset function wasn't in the game, it would have been a really big complaint of mine that the cache is so hard to reach. But luckily, the developers seemed to know this was the case and addressed it. Although there is a case to be made that they should have just made the icons less annoying to get in the first place. Another awesome thing about this game that would probably be overlooked by a lot of people is how goddamn fast you can restart objectives or return to your custom marker. It literally takes less than a second to pause the game, go down on the pause menu, press X to restart the objective, and then have the game reload everything. It's instantaneous, which is not only impressive how it can load that quickly, but also shows that the game never drops any control inputs, even on the menus. It's as smooth as butter, just like the frame rate, which once again, just like Pro Skater 3, is a silky 60 frames per second at all times. An improvement to Pro Skater 3 as well is that you can actually play Pro Skater 4 in widescreen, and you might be wondering why the footage you're looking at isn't widescreen in that case, and that's because for some reason the option to make the game widescreen isn't on the main menu, but it is on the pause menu. And by the time I figured that out, I had already recorded hours of footage in a 4:3 aspect ratio, so for the sake of consistency, I just left it like that. At the start of this video, I mentioned how this game took me 13 hours to complete, and for a Tony Hawk game, that's insane. The amount of content featured in the career mode here is absolutely staggering, and if you're looking for value for money in a Tony Hawk game, this is by far the one with the most content, at least at this point in the series. So in order to 100% the game, you have to collect all of the cache icons, complete all of the minigames, do the 16 objectives in each of the 7 levels, and then get all of the gaps in all of the levels too. The gap list is another feature from Pro Skater 2 that was strangely absent from Pro Skater 3, so it's good to see it return here for that little bit of extra content for completionists. I didn't actually get all of the gaps when I played the game for this review, but I did literally everything else, and that's good enough for me. After you've done all of that, you might be thinking you've finished, but then there's 2 unlockable levels, Carnival and Chicago, which actually debuted in Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX 2, which each have a further 14 goals to complete. Then on top of that, when you've completed a certain number of goals across the entire game, you unlock 5 hardcore goals in all of the 7 main levels in the game, as well as a pro challenge for every single pro skater in the game. That's an insane amount of what I guess you could call post-game content. I've said in my reviews of each of the previous Pro Skater games that it's really weird how the early levels never require you to get very high scores, and how it would have been interesting if the levels reversed the order on repeat playthroughs. And here we have Pro Skater 4 actually acknowledge this, and it asks you to go back to early levels and not only get reasonably high scores, but also do a selection of more difficult objectives too. That's awesome. The difficulty of the game is a bit all over the place though. Some of the hardcore goals unlocked at the end of the game are far easier than the standard goals, while some of the others are genuinely pretty difficult, which is what you would expect. The pro goals, which are unique to specific skaters, vary drastically in terms of difficulty as well. Tony Hawk's and Bob Burnquist's are ridiculously difficult, whereas others like Rodney Mullen or Eric Coston's are extremely easy. It's not the worst thing ever, but the difficulty spikes in this game are reasonably frequent and often feel somewhat unfair. Like this goal where you need to jump over the massive rock in the zoo level, or Bob Burnquist's Pro Challenge where you need to perform certain tricks while going around a loop which has a gap in the middle. I swear that for this one you have to reduce your stats, because I found myself always going way too fast to finish the animation of the trick in the amount of time you have. I did it in the end, but it's a bit of a nightmare. With this drastically different gameplay structure to the previous games, they also changed the element of the game where you would need to finish it multiple times as all of the different skaters in order to unlock everything. Because the career mode is so long just finishing it as a single character, they instead opted to simply only ask you to finish it the one time, and any stats you unlock as one character also apply to the other characters. This works extremely well for this new gameplay style, but I will say that this makes Pro Skater 4 by far the game in the series with the least replay value. Once you've done it one time, there's nothing really to play it again for, but to be honest, after finishing it one time, you've probably had your fill of the game. Plus, there are the gaps to get if you want to go for true 100%. But the new, more open gameplay structure isn't the only thing that's new that Pro Skater 4 brings to the table. Whereas Pro Skater 3 really only introduced one new mechanic, which was the revert, Pro Skater 4 adds so much more than that. New to Pro Skater 4, we have the ability to spine transfer, which is where you go up a vert ramp and then transition to another ramp on the other side of it, giving you massive air and speed in the process. We can also now do trick switching while in the middle of a grind, lip trick or manual, which basically allows you to double tap a combination of face buttons while in the middle of one of those types of trick, which will make your skater transition to another trick, building up your points and multiplier very quickly at the expense of making your balance slightly worse each time you do it. The best thing by far about this new mechanic is that you can now do proper Flatland tricks, jumping onto your board and using it as a pogo stick and all sorts of other crazy things. While I would argue that the grind and lip trick switching doesn't add much to the game, the manual trick switching shines a light on a previously unexplored aspect of skating, as well as giving you another set of tools to get even higher scores. Another thing added to this game is the ability to flatten yourself out if you messed up a jump from a vert ramp and are about to smash into the floor and bail. This ability might seem overpowered at first because it takes away from the skill of having to position yourself properly on ramps, but to be honest it's not too bad because most of the time if you flatten out in the air you'll have no speed when you hit the floor, making it difficult to continue the combo anyway. It's almost just like a last resort type situation. There's also another new ability in the form of Skitching, which allows you to grab a moving object such as a car and simply hang onto it while on your board, making you pick up insane speed. This is really only used in very specific objectives and can't really be used in actual combos, so it's kind of a bit pointless for the main gameplay. But hey, it gives you something else to do in the career mode, I suppose. But that's kind of my issue with most of the new abilities in this game. Whereas Pro Skater 3 only added one major new ability, that being the revert, that one ability completely changed the game for the better, whereas the new abilities in Pro Skater 4 are either very context sensitive, like spine transferring and skitching, or they make the game easier by removing an element of skill, like with the flattening out. Or they just sometimes outright don't change anything major enough to warrant existing, like the grind and lip trick switching. I feel like Pro Skater 4 was running the risk of almost becoming too complicated, with a lot of unnecessary game mechanics that don't actually improve the game. What makes this even worse for newcomers to the series is that Pro Skater 4 doesn't feature a tutorial mode to learn the basics of movement and stringing together combos, despite Pro Skater 3 having this. I feel like they could have potentially trimmed some of this new stuff back a bit and focused more on the core gameplay that they had already pretty much perfected in the last game. I do really like the manual trick switching though, and I genuinely think that's an awesome addition to the game. Now, despite me complaining a lot there, you would still think that Pro Skater 4 would be the best game in the series, right? After all, it brings back the cash system, it has by far the most in-depth creator skater we've seen, the most tricks and abilities we've seen in the series so far, and generally the most content. Well, I went into this game thinking that it was the second best in the series, only just behind Pro Skater 3. However, after playing all of the games back to back like this, my opinion has actually somewhat changed. The absolute biggest issue with Pro Skater 4 is that the levels are really not up to scratch with the ones we saw from Pro Skater 3 and even Pro Skater 2. Most of them are themed after real-world places, which makes them lack a distinct identity visually. But even disregarding that, I also think that some of the levels are straight up bad in this game. Even the ones which are pretty good are far too big in my opinion. Like for example College, where you can literally skate around an entire campus with 5 or so main areas. But the issue with this is that it's difficult comboing from one area to another seamlessly, and it forces you to generally stick to one area at a time and lacks the flow that the levels from the previous games had. Then we have the straight up bad levels, like Shipyard, which is just a complete mess in my opinion. Having vert ramps that lead to nowhere and just being way too filled with random walls and obstacles that get in the way of your lines constantly. I almost think that you could take the best level from this game, which in my opinion is probably San Francisco, and pit it against the worst level from Pro Skater 3, which is probably Suburbia, and I would say that Suburbia is far better. That's obviously entirely subjective, and you might love a level from Pro Skater 4 that I hate, but I really do think that it would be difficult to argue that the levels from Pro Skater 4 are anywhere near the level of quality as the ones from 3. I have issues with the new gameplay structure too, where with it giving you a time limit for one single objective at a time and only allowing you to do one objective at a time too, you lose the sense of satisfaction you get from replaying the game over and over again and eventually learning how to complete every single goal in one run, because you literally can't do that anymore. Whereas Pro Skater 3 felt like you have the freedom to be creative by tackling goals in whatever order you wanted and however you wanted to do them, Pro Skater 4 completely limits you by forcing you to focus on one thing at a time and do objectives in a specific area. The levels also lack the insane interactivity that you had in Pro Skater 3. Like, remember how you could cause the earthquake in Los Angeles, or make the pirate ship shoot a hole through the wall in Skater Island? Well, for the most part, nothing like that really happens in Pro Skater 4. Don't get me wrong, there are examples where it does happen, like here where you jump onto the elephant in Zoo, which makes it run into the aquarium, opening a new area for you. But for the most part, it feels like the interesting interactive elements from Pro Skater 3 were replaced by the more gimmicky goals and with the minigames, which is a little bit disappointing. Pro Skater 4 does do something pretty interesting to make up for this though, in the way that by completing certain goals, you'll unlock some pro objects, which give you more things to trick off as you play the game. This is normally something as simple as a new ramp appearing, but it is actually pretty interesting, and I think they could have expanded this idea and made it a little bit more obvious. Because to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if people had played through this game and not even noticed that the levels were adding in new elements as you were playing it. There's loads of little things I could also complain about, like how the menu is nowhere near as good as the one from Pro Skater 3. How there's some objectives which are infuriating to complete and kinda feel unfair at times, like this one where you need to jump over a building and perform a special trick, but you have barely enough time to pull it off before you hit the floor, and you can only just get high enough to make it, even jumping without doing the trick. And I could also complain about the length of the game maybe being a bit over the top. As I already said, it took me 13 hours to finish, and that was without going for all of the gaps in the game. But you could also argue that this is a good thing that you get this much time with it. The one last thing I'll mention here is that I feel like the unlockables in this game are a bit lacking compared to the previous games. In Pro Skater 3, you unlocked 3 new secret levels, or technically 4 if you count Cruise Ship, whereas in Pro Skater 4, you only unlock 2. In Pro Skater 3, you unlock 8 new characters, whereas in Pro Skater 4, you unlock 4. So despite the levels having more goals and being bigger, there are also less of them and less unlockable characters too, so you could make an argument that that balances it out, I suppose. While I have just been quite negative towards Pro Skater 4, I do want to point out that it is still a really good game, just not quite as good as Pro Skater 3. I mean, let's face it, comparing anything to Pro Skater 3 is probably going to make whatever that thing is look quite bad by comparison, right? But anyway, let's now move on and take a look at the multiplayer options featured in the game. All of the game modes from Pro Skater 3 make the return here, so we have Trick Attack, Graffiti, Slap, King of the Hill, Horse, and Free Skate. But new to this game are 2 more game modes, which are Score Challenge and Combo Mambo. Score Challenge is very similar to Trick Attack, but rather than having a time limit and seeing who can get the best overall score, Score Challenge tasks you with reaching a set score, and the first one to do so wins. It's a similar concept, but the difference is that you won't want to overdo a combo and keep it going for longer than you need to, because the score you need to reach might not be that high. It adds another dimension to the gameplay, and I quite like it. I do think that I would stick with Trick Attack over this one for the most part though. Combo Mambo is actually genuinely really good, and I wish this was in Pro Skater 3. This again is similar to Trick Attack, but instead of the score going up with each trick you perform, the score you have will only be based on your single best combo. So in order to improve your score, you need to do a better combo than the one you did previously. This can be insanely tense because you can be watching your opponent in the middle of a huge combo, and if they land it, they could be beating you by a lot. But then on their end, they feel tension because they want to keep the combo going for as long as possible, because it will be difficult to build it up to this point again. But the longer they hold it, the more difficult it is to maintain speed and balance, and one wrong move could result in losing it all. It's a great idea, and became one of the main multiplayer modes I played in this game. So yeah, just like with all of the other Pro Skater games, the multiplayer here is just as good as it's ever been, and in some ways, it's even better than it's ever been before. That seems to be something that they never fail to impress with. I'm putting Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 in 3rd place on my series ranking, which actually shocks me because I honestly never expected myself to be saying that I preferred Pro Skater 2 to this game. I've always said that 3 and 4 are my favourites, but after playing them back to back with a critical eye like this, 2 is definitely a superior game to 4. While 4 makes a lot of improvements to 2, such as the graphics being a lot better, the frame rate being better and more consistent, the ability to revert making combos more satisfying, the soundtrack being much more expansive and having way more content in terms of the amount of goals and characters, I just feel like 2's levels and its arcade-style gameplay structure make it a more satisfying, fun and replayable experience overall. There's something about being given a list of goals to complete and then being thrown into a level for 2 minutes that just works a lot better with these games, and it's kind of a shame that after Pro Skater 3 they never properly went back to that style. With Underground and the later games, they went even more story-driven and mission-orientated, which in the end took away from the simplicity and sort of pure skating experience you got from the older games. Pro Skater 4 is still a great game though, don't let its negatives put you off too much, because it's still an absolute blast, and it's probably the most difficult game in the series so far. So if you're looking for a challenge, this is probably the best one to get. It's also obviously better than Pro Skater 1, but I feel like that goes without saying. Despite Pro Skater 1 being great, it's far more dated and lacks vital gameplay mechanics that make the other games flow so well. I would really only recommend you go back to that one if you're a fan of the series and want to see where it started. I almost feel like a lot of the negative points I've made about Pro Skater 4 are entirely subjective, but that's what makes it so interesting to talk about. Do you prefer the larger levels and more mission-based structure of Pro Skater 4, or do you prefer the smaller but more densely populated levels of Pro Skater 1, 2 and 3? There's arguments to be made for both, but I definitely fall on the side of the original 3 games with the arcade style of gameplay that they were going for. Next in my Tony Hawk's Pro Skater review marathon, we're going to be jumping ahead 2 console generations to take a look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, a game which is pretty notorious as being a broken, buggy mess. But is it as bad as people make it out to be? You'll have to join me for my next video to find out. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and leave a comment down below letting me know what your favourite style of Tony Hawk game is. And, until the next video, bye!